It's a great pleasure to be here today and to visit the station, I must say, and to engage with you. I don't have an agenda, so I'll make a few remarks and then let's have a discussion. I've been a journalist, as he gave away, since 1981. So I've been a journalist longer than most of you have been alive, 35 years. And I'm just warming up. I'm just starting to learn how to do it and warming up. But I've been fortunate in that I've been in every possible medium. I started as a print journalist in the days when print was print. I started in a community newspaper called the Springs Advertiser, Springs and Brakpan Advertiser. I was at the Sowetan, it was the Sunday World, the Sunday World before that was banned or closed down, and then the Sowetan, and then the Rand Daily Mail, which was a great newspaper of the time that was closed in 1985, and then I was part of the group that went and started what was the Weekly Mail and is now the Mail and Guardian. In those days that was quite a tough thing to do, but they were also incredibly exciting times for journalism, where we did some memorable things, often very cheeky, often broke the rules, but pretty memorable. You know, the kind of thing you can do when you've got no money and you're young and foolish. I went into radio thereafter. I was part of pulling together the consortium that became Kagiso Broadcasting and then Kagiso Media. We bid for SABC stations when they first sold them. We got East Coast Radio and OFM, and I oversaw that transition at the time. But I found management boring, so I went to the university because they wanted to start a journalism school at Wits. We didn't have one before. They wanted to start one. I went across there. So I'm not a real professor. I'm what they call an adjunct professor. I don't have a PhD, but I've obviously been practicing for a long time so that they believe I know what I'm talking about. I also ran an internet publishing business. I've done quite a lot of online stuff called Big Media, which is closed now, but we did a whole lot of stuff in the early 2000s. And then 2 years ago, I went to be editor-in-chief of ENCA. I had written for television before. I wrote a television drama with some friends a while back. But this was the first time I ran a television newsroom. Exciting thing to do, but very difficult, very tough. And I left there recently, and I'm going back to Wits early next year. I'm just taking a few months off on sabbatical. And one of the things I'm using this time for is to catch up on what's happening in the community radio. So I've been visiting a couple, and I'm going to visit some more, quite a range of them, in Gauteng, in KZN, in the Eastern Cape, and here, get a sense of how they're doing and what the issues are. I'm very concerned about the space for independent media. My feeling is we're seeing a lot of political and economic pressures that are squeezing that space. And I think it's very clear at the moment in this political climate that maintaining independent space for media is critically important to the future of this country and to our democracy. So that's my main concern. I'm sensing in print, for example, with the financial pressures, political pressures, more and more newspapers are becoming partisan. Not just partisan, but factional. They're backing not just, say, the ANC, but a faction in the ANC. And I think that's destructive. I think it seldom produces good media and good journalism. And in this political climate, I think it's unfortunate. I think it's one of the reasons there's so much fake news that does the rounds. Because there are people not just who take a position. I don't have a problem with media that has a standpoint, that takes a position. But I have a problem, and after all, the Weekly Mail always took a position. It always had a view and an attitude. But I have a problem if you bend the rules of journalism, if you bend the truth, if you bend the facts for that purpose. You know, it seems to me that even it's fine to have a view and a standpoint. Sometimes it's better, but I think you still have to rely on the facts. You still have to be balanced. You still have to hear the other side. You still have to give voice to the other side, even if you don't like them. And I'm worried that increasingly there's less and less space for that, certainly in the print media. In radio and broadcasting, we see all kinds of political pressures on that space. Certainly at ENCA, I mean, the political parties were on our back like you can't believe. You couldn't sneeze without one of them calling you to complain that you sneezed in the wrong direction. It's very important that we look after that space and defend it. And get the political parties to understand they have their point, they have their role, we have our role. And it's different. They have their responsibilities, we have ours, and ours is different. And key for us is to maintain an independence, to do what we think is right for our audience, for our communities, however our audience is defined. To remind ourselves all the time that we do it for other people, we do it for that audience. We don't do it for political parties. It may be that the interests of the station and a political party may go in the same direction. Interests of a community and a political party, a radio station, are pointing in one direction. But we have a role and an interest and a position and a responsibility that's different. And we need to remind ourselves of that all the time. It's both an interesting and challenging time to be a journalist, I'm sure you know. Your ability to communicate speedily, to interact with your audience is like nothing we knew. If we got a letter from a reader, every now and then we thought that was a big deal. And if somebody wrote a letter, we published it, we didn't publish it, it was our decision. Now, I mean, I felt it very strongly at ENCA. You are monitoring and following social media all the time and having to react and try and catch up. Your biggest competition is not other radio stations or other television stations. It's often individuals on their social media or groups on their social media who are ahead of the game, who are criticizing you, who are responding, who are engaging. It's very exciting. And it's fabulous in many ways, but it's also both difficult and can be quite dangerous. I'm very concerned that we have to be aware of fake news, the systematic attempt by people to mislead us, to produce false or misleading information, to detract us from the real issues, to detract us from what we want to be talking about for their political purposes. It's not new. It's always happened. It was under apartheid. I don't know if you youngsters know it, but the security police used to have a thing called Stratcom, Strategic Communications, which was a unit deliberately set up to spread false and misleading information. Often about the ANC, often about exiles, often about the UDF, the underground, the resistance. And you constantly had to filter that stuff to try and catch it before you got caught. When Ruth First, who was a writer and activist in Maputo and the wife of Joe Slovo, was killed by a bomb by South African agents in Maputo, they put out a story that Joe Slovo had killed her. And one newspaper, The Star, ran it obviously over time they were very embarrassed and I think they had to pay compensation and apologize for doing it. So it's not new fake news. But what we're seeing at the moment is, I think, two things. The first is that obviously social media means that fake news moves much quicker, much faster, much wider, and we don't control it. I mean, you must remember that in those days you had gatekeepers all the time, right? You didn't get a news bulletin on air unless it'd been through a news editor and an editor and a sub-editor and a fact checker and a lawyer and a this and a that, right? Checking you. Now, of course, some either fool or malicious person sits with their computer, they tweet, they Facebook, they put up blogs, and sometimes for money, sometimes for political purpose, they can manufacture any nonsense. And as you know, it's easy for us to get caught out. Fake pictures. 702 got caught out just last week. I don't know if you saw that picture from the floods in Houston of a shark on the freeway. Did you see that picture? Now, it's a picture of a shark that's been used many times for jokes. But it was tweeted by someone, said, look, there's a shark on the Houston freeway. And there was Stephen Curtis on 702 saying, have you seen this incredible picture? Of course, he was embarrassed because he got caught out. He got tripped up. But I think it's in a worse situation when there's media that's prepared for political ends to give credibility to such stuff. It was very, it was very striking that in the Cyril Ramaphosa allegations over the weekend, the way they did it was they first put it out on social media so that it was unstoppably out. No gatekeepers, no fact-checking, no verification. Then one newspaper, Sunday Independent, whose editor is notably partisan and factional, got fired from the Citizen, frankly, for being captured by one faction. He ran it as fact, whereas everyone else ran it in the framework of it's a smear campaign, and who's running the smear campaign, and why is this poisoning our politics. Now, it may be true or untrue. My guess is it's partly true. But I think we have to be absolutely conscious and develop the skills and the techniques and the approaches to identify it and how to deal with it and how to treat it. We can't ignore it. We often have to counter it. If people are seeing it in social media, if we're in media like radio, I think, we have to use our credibility to say either be careful of it, we don't think it's true, or it is true. We verified it, it is true. As individuals and as a radio station, nothing is more valuable to you than your credibility. Your future, your name, your reputation, your personal brand all depend on your credibility. Now, we all make mistakes. I've made some terrible mistakes that I won't repeat. Interesting about mistakes, it's when you learn the most. When you get things right, well, you get things right, you think you're hell of a smart. It's when you make mistakes that you learn. So you make mistakes. But what's critical is to correct them. For your credibility, you can make a mistake as long as you correct it honestly, fully, frankly, as quickly as possible. Look after your and your station's credibility, because those things are always tied up together. And your future depends on it. You can destroy your credibility in 10 minutes by being unthoughtful, careless, and not fixing things when you do get them wrong. What do you want to talk about? I love radio, let me tell you that. You're in a fantastic medium, maybe the best. And as I say, I've worked in them all. But I have a special feeling for radio, because it's so immediate, because you can just do such great things. You can tell great stories. I think one of the things we have to do in this country is become better storytellers. I think we have lots of news, lots happening, lots to talk about all the time. You know, we're fortunate in that way. We're not like Australia or Canada, where people are so bored they want to come live here. But I think we have to constantly explore new ways to tell those stories and to tell them as great stories. So a lot of my focus is on storytelling. Mostly for me it's in writing. But I don't think it matters what medium you're in. Hopefully you're teaching yourselves to work in all the media. It used to be that when you chose radio, that was it, right? Now our students, we have to teach them so much that we can never fit it in 1 year.
What goes into a good story? I think everybody, and I'm always on their cases, but we need to tell people stories. What goes into a good story?
Look, it's very basic, and it's been true since the stories of the Bible to now. A good story, first of all, it's about people. Okay, it's seldom about issues or events. It's about the people that are behind that, because we're interested in people, and because people are interesting and they're unpredictable, and we're always learning more about people. So one thing always is remind yourself that you might be out to do something on housing, but it's not the houses that are interesting. It's the people and their lives and their attitudes and what they say. So yes, they can talk about housing, their relationship to housing, their lack of housing, their housing, whatever it is, but it's the people that are important. The other thing is, I would say the second thing is tension. Telling a story is all about the pace and the rhythm and the tension. Sometimes you even know what the end point is. Do you read stories? That's a good question. Do you listen to stories? Do you listen to podcasts? So if you're not listening to, for example, This American Life, do people know it? Okay, go and get it, download and listen. Steal some data time from the station and listen. So This American Life is a fantastic American example of storytelling. It's done by a legend of broadcasting called Ira Glass. I've been trying to get him to come out to this country for a while, but he won't get on an aeroplane. He hates flying. He's a completely eccentric, crazy guy who's just a brilliant storyteller. And he can do This American Life about anything. But it's about people. It's always simple. So that's another thing. Is that a story, an issue can be complex. But the genius is to tell it as a simple, straightforward story. Doesn't mean you don't. A simple, straightforward story should always have complexity. Should always have layers of. A great story has layers of meaning. You're telling a story about this person, but actually it's also about this and this and this and this, without hitting people in the face with the issue. So when you think about it after, you think, geez, I listened to that person's story, and only afterwards did I realize actually the story was about something else. But they took me through the story, and they didn't have to say to me, this is about housing. It's always a tension. And the tension can be, how is this going to end? But sometimes you say the end in the beginning. Sometimes you tell a story by saying, I'm going to tell you how this person died. If you ever read the great storyteller Gabriel Garcia Marquez, South American, I'm telling you, reading and listening, because the heart of good media is what media you consume. And the heart of any thinking media person is reading, listening, watching. So if you haven't read Gabriel Garcia Marquez, 100 Years of Solitude, won the Nobel Prize, he's from Colombia, he was a journalist, you must read him. Because his way of storytelling was often to start with the ending. Yeah, so he wrote a book called Chronicle of a Death Foretold. So he knew that at the end, somebody died. But then he took you back to how and why the person came to die. And it's that tension, that unpredictability, that what's next, that keeps a person. And it's so much more important now because because you're competing for people's attention, And you're not just competing against other radio, you're competing against reading and social media and Facebook and Google and everything else. So unless you grab that person by the nuts and tell them a story that has them glued to their radio. And so often, I find all the time, I'm down here, in fact, as part of a speaking tour. I'm speaking to people about fake news, mostly to corporates about fake news and what they need to do about it. And I find every time, I can talk theoretically about fake news, but it's so much better when I tell them a story. I can give them citations and reading and theory about fake news. But if I say to them, when Donald Trump was running for president, he said this, and then somebody ran this fake news story, and this happened, and I tell it as a story. People always want to hear the story. And if you tell it in the right way, then they're learning about fake news through the storytelling. You don't have to slap them in the face with the theory. So for me, it's incredibly important. If you're not spending all your time reading, you're limiting yourself. I say reading loosely, but I mean consuming thoughts and ideas and stories, whether it's on radio or podcasts or television, but there is nothing like reading. And I find it's an issue with all my students. People read a lot on their phone, it's true, so they consume a lot of information, but not a lot of reading in depth.
I would like to know, since you started your career in 1981, what legacy you want to leave?
Me? Jeez, that's a tough question. Look, I would like to think that the Mail and Guardian is a key legacy I've left behind, in that I was part of the group that started it from nothing, and I think it's been an important newspaper for 30 years now. And I hope it can survive, and I hope it grows its digital presence. I mean, an interesting thing about the Weekly Mail was it was one of the first newspapers in the world to go online, to do an email edition, and then when the web Weekly Mail came before the web, right? And as soon as the web came, we took the paper there. So it was then a newspaper. I think it's less now, that was looking ahead to the future. So I would have thought, but more generally, as a journalist, one hopes one can do more good than harm. Journalism can do an enormous amount of good, but it can also do harm. Sometimes on purpose, sometimes in error. Very often you write a story that you know or you think is going to do good, but it hurts people, harms people. So at the end of the day, you hope you do more good than harm. That's all.
I feel like in South Africa now, my point of view, especially when it comes to journalists or media houses, it's kind of like, instead of about the people, it's more of business, in terms of like making money. For example, things like the ANN7, where I was viewing it. So as someone who's pushing, especially for underground or upcoming journalists or upcoming storytellers, what are you looking forward to in terms of, do you feel like, do you want to influence these young people in terms of starting their own media houses where they can be able to start their own newspapers, or you want them to be able to bring back that journalism ethics, or you feel like, what, we're moving with the times are different now?
So you never told me who you are. So let's take a step back and tell me your name and...
My name is Kusi.
Yeah.
My surname is Badger, but my full name is Kusi. I live in Myanmar. I do the show called Morning Cruise.
Yeah. And have you studied journalism? How do you come into it?
I studied film and video production.
Okay. Where did you study?
At Kuwait, so organization.
Okay. Right. Thank you. Look, there's no question you have to move with the times. There's no question that you can't go back to the way we did things in journalism 30 years ago. And why would you want to? There's so many opportunities thrown up by the internet and social media. I don't know if you understand how easy it is now to research a story compared to the way it was. You know? Before the internet, before cell phones. When you were out on a story and you had to find a ticky box to feed coins in and read your story through. It was a different set of skills. It was challenging in a different way. But I mean, that's gone, and thank goodness that's gone. Thank goodness nowadays you have fantastic tools. Look, I would say what's great now is that you can go on the web and start a blog or start a podcast. You can much more easily find a lot of ways to get your voice out there on social media, on the internet, and that's just something we didn't have, you know. Yeah.
I'm Matthew. I produce for Badger. It's 2 to 4 show.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, because we started Backchat on ENCA, right? Talk shows, yeah.
Yeah, they were very active. That's the oldest show on refrigerator.
I was just wondering now, as you said, it's more easier to get your voice out now than it used to be.
Yes.
Do you think that opens, as well as social media, do you think that opens the gate to more journalists becoming lazy? As like just take things as it is instead of doing more research and...
No, I think the danger is that journalists never leave their desk. That they think they can do everything with Google and on the telephone. And the fact is that great journalism is mostly about getting out there, about seeing things at first hand, about interacting with people, about going to get people's voices. You know, it's such a common practice among young journalists now to email people questions. And I know that when they email me questions, it's much easier. Right? If somebody interviews you on radio, and the beauty of radio is you can interview someone live, and if they say something stupid or terrible, they're responsible for it. Right? If you do it on email, they'll fix it. They'll say, no, I didn't say I stole the money. I said I borrowed the money. Do you know what I mean? And a lot of that is laziness. Whereas an enormous, the best stuff comes from getting out there, experiencing it, seeing it, interacting with people, talking, listening to people. And if you don't do that, you'll struggle to do really good stories, because, as I say, it's about people.
Hi, I'm Ronald. I'm the producer of the show called Building the Nation. I'd like to ask a question regarding journalism. What I want to know is how best can journalism student prepare for the future?
Jeez. Reading. You know, reading, and again I say reading, listening, watching, going to look for the best and to learn from the best. Go and read the great storytelling, listen to the great radio and podcasts, and think about it critically. You know, what makes this good? What makes it bad? How would I have done it? What lessons can I learn from this? Why does it work? Why does it not work? What are people doing that's interesting and provocative? You know, I think that great media is always disruptive. You have background radio, right? And you have foreground radio. Great media is when you force people to listen or read or pay attention, because it's disruptive. It says things you don't expect. It makes you uncomfortable. It makes you sit up and listen. And that's mostly about ideas. You know? So obviously you've got to get as wide a range of skills as you can, because these days you need over time to be able to operate radio, or television, or print, all of them. And I can tell you, after 35 years, you never stop learning. You never stop saying, geez, I could have done that better. After 35 years, I'm just starting to get it right. Yeah.
My name is Lachey. I studied journalism and media studies, and I'm doing news here.
Where did you study?
At Tamlin.
Mm-hmm.
What I wanted to know is, like, all of my life, basically, I wanted to be a journalist, but I don't know how to balance it. Like, when I'm at work. When I go home, I'm still at work. Like, my brain is still awake. How do you balance it? Because it's that insane.
Look, what you say is good, because it means you're passionate about it and you're thinking a lot about it. So that's not a bad thing. You know, it's not a bad thing. And the truth is that journalism is consuming. You're always looking for a story. You always think about how to tell the story. You're always looking for a new angle, a fresh approach, right? But I think one learns over time to compartmentalize, to say, now I'm at home with my family or my friends, and I've got to put that away, because otherwise it drives you crazy. But you'll have time. You'll have time. I mean, when you're young, it's fantastic to be consumed and passionate and be driven by it. You know?
And one last question. You said you were in print media and in radio.
Yes.
I freelanced while I was still at school. I was writing articles for Nextdoor. How do you...
What's Nextdoor?
The voice of the king.
Okay.
I find it difficult because, like, when you write a story, you can just go wild. But when you do a story for radio, you're kind of limited. How do you select what is important? Because when you write a story, there's a lot of things that's important.
Yes.
But when you transfer it to radio...
Radio's got to be much shorter.
Yes.
But most writing these days, you know, you have to be short and punchy, because you have to fight for people's attention. And if you meander and give the point, you lose them. But you know, when you're a journalist, you're making those decisions all the time. I'm looking at a scene, I'm saying, what's important in this scene? What is it that captures something about this person or this scene or this event? And sometimes it's a small detail that you don't expect, you know? So a lot of what you have to learn over time is that filtering. What's critical to my story and what isn't? Because you know, you walk into a room, you can endlessly describe something that's going on. You can endlessly quote different people. But the point is to decide which quote is the most impactful, tells you the most, in the shortest possible, quickest time, because you want to hold people's attention. Which detail? Is it that he's wearing a blue cap? Does that tell you something about him? Or is it that he's sitting like this? Which tells you more about him?
My name is Tula Grootboom.
From?
Tula Grootboom.
Grootboom, yeah.
I am currently an intern here. I study multimedia at CPT, so it's Cape.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, what is the one thing that drove you, and one thing that drove you, the thing that made you not to give up?
I think it's, you know, and I'm somebody who wanted to be a journalist from when I was a kid. I always knew I wanted to be a journalist. I think it's the passion to get information out. It's the belief that getting information out, if people have knowledge and information, you're empowering them. You can change people's lives and attitudes and relationships and their work and their play with information and with stories. And so wanting to keep doing that. I suppose fundamentally believing how important information is, in the big sense of holding the rich and powerful to account, but in the small sense of empowering people because they know more. And I think we need to do a lot of work to get people more critically aware of the media. And I think that's one thing in relation to fake news. I think we need to be teaching it in schools, everywhere, is teaching people to understand how the media works and to be able to approach it critically. Because the critical thing in dealing with fake news, for example, is the capacity to say, hold on a minute, I'm skeptical, I don't believe this. Or to have the skills to understand it and analyze it and know whether or not you can trust it. I think we have to spread that kind of media knowledge and awareness, that critical knowledge, as much as we can. From? Yeah.
What I wanted to ask was, would you advise someone to see
the right person, I wouldn't say do it for the money. Well, there is money. I've made a living. I've made a decent living. So I wouldn't say it. But if I wanted to make money, I would have been a banker or something else. Do you know what I mean? So if the right person, if you're curious, maybe the best quality you can have as a journalist is to be curious, is to want to understand people and what lies behind people and events and things and communities. That's the best quality, is to be always interested, always asking questions. Knowing you're not always going to get the answers, but the questions are worth asking anyway. So I would say that if you're curious and you enjoy engaging with people and you enjoy producing media and you enjoy telling stories, then absolutely you must do it. Is it always going to be easy? No, it isn't. Because journalism is going through such changes that we're uncertain about the future. But I've always loved it. It's taken me places I would never go otherwise. I've met people I would never meet otherwise. I've learned, and I learn all the time new things. I wrote a book about a place called Diepsloot. So I spent 6 months in an informal settlement you might have heard of in Joburg called Diepsloot. And that was fabulous because I would never, as a white middle class person, I'd never been to Diepsloot. So I said, okay, I'm going to go. And I spent 6 months. I met people, stayed there, interviewed people. And that's what I loved, Took me out of my comfort zone. So it's for the right person. You've got to be prepared to get out of your comfort zone. Be curious. Break some barriers. Push the envelope. If you're that sort of person, then it's a fabulous thing to do.
As a person that can be seen as a role model, may I ask who your role models are, or who they have been over the years?
Because I'm first and foremost a writer, I think it's mostly great writers. I quoted Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He's my favorite fiction writer. I think he's just wonderful. I think there were great South Africans like Nat Nakaza, investigative journalist, gave us everything, broke ground, did outrageous things. So my role models are journalists who break the boundaries. And that's because that's what I've always tried to do. I like to get up people's noses.
Your journalism, not fictionally, but it's like your experience, you said journalism is.
I would say it's For me, it's about empowering people by giving them information and stories that enriches their lives. However you do that, whether it's visual or audio or a mixture of them, whether it's by writing, but telling unusual and unexpected stories that can change the way people think.